The ballroom of Ashcombe House glittered like a jewel cut too sharply to touch. Chandeliers spilled light upon silks and satins, upon powdered hair and measured smiles, upon a society convinced of its own benevolence. Music floated through the air, violins sighing, cellos murmuring, yet beneath the melody lay another rhythm, the pulse of scrutiny. Every glance weighed, every whisper appraised. In such rooms, destinies were decided with the slightest tilt of a head. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb stood near a pillar veined with gold, perfectly placed to be overlooked. She wore dove-gray silk, chosen for modesty rather than admiration, and gloves that concealed hands accustomed to usefulness rather than ornament. Her posture was immaculate, her expression composed, yet no ornament could disguise the truth society read so fluently. She was not the beauty of her family. That title belonged, without dispute, to her cousin Arabella, now laughing beneath the chandeliers as though born of their light. "Poor Eleanor," someone murmured, not unkindly. "So sensible. So plain." The words did not wound because they were new. They wounded because they were accurate in the way only repeated judgments become. Eleanor had learned long ago the discipline of invisibility, the art of standing still while others were chosen. Tonight was no different. Tonight was merely grander. The arrival of the Duke of Ravensmere altered the air itself. Conversation faltered, fans paused mid-flutter, and mothers straightened with renewed purpose. He entered with the confidence of one accustomed to command, tall, dark-haired, his expression carved into polite reserve. Wealth clung to him invisibly, as unmistakable as scent. Titles followed him like shadows, unspoken yet universally understood. Expectation rushed to meet him. Eyes darted to Arabella, resplendent in rose silk, her beauty sharpened by triumph. This was the match society had already arranged in its mind. A duke required a jewel required a coronet. Eleanor felt the familiar shrinking sensation as the narrative excluded her entirely. She watched, detached, as if observing her own life from a distance. The formalities proceeded with ceremonial precision. Introductions were made, bows exchanged. When the Duke stood before Arabella, the room leaned closer, breath collectively held. Eleanor studied the pattern of the marble floor, finding solace in its predictability. "My lord," Arabella said, her voice a practiced harmony of sweetness and assurance. The Duke inclined his head. His gaze assessed, measured, and then, most unexpectedly, cooled. His reply was courteous, impeccable, and devastating in its restraint. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "you do your family great credit. Yet I find myself unsuited to the expectations placed before us." A silence fell, thick as velvet. Arabella's smile faltered, just perceptibly. Whispers ignited like sparks. The Duke stepped back, the rejection complete without cruelty, yet unmistakable. Society recoiled, shocked not by the refusal, but by its target. Humiliation is rarely loud. It settles instead, quiet and suffocating. Eleanor felt it secondhand, a sympathetic ache, though she herself had been spared notice. She told herself this moment did not concern her. She was practiced at being irrelevant. Yet when she lifted her eyes, she found the Duke looking at her. It was not the glance of curiosity bestowed upon oddities, nor the dismissive sweep reserved for furniture. It was intent, searching, as though, in the aftermath of scandal, his attention had found something still. Eleanor's breath caught. Their eyes held for a heartbeat too long to be accidental, too brief to invite interpretation. She looked away first, chastened by the audacity of hope. The music resumed, uncertainly. Conversation followed, louder than before, as though volume might erase discomfort. Eleanor retreated further into the margins, her pulse unsteady. She told herself she had imagined it. She had imagined many things before. Yet the night refused to release its tension. As the guests resumed their dances and alliances, a rumor began its delicate ascent. The Duke had dismissed beauty. The Duke had defied expectation. And somewhere, unspoken but felt, lingered the unsettling possibility that he had seen what others had chosen never to notice. Eleanor stood alone as the chandeliers burned on, unaware that the smallest shift had already begun, and that her careful invisibility had, for the first time, been broken. She felt it as one feels a change in weather before the sky darkens. There was no declaration, no summons, yet the space around her seemed altered, charged with meaning she did not yet understand. Eleanor reminded herself that glances were not promises, that men of rank indulged in distractions as easily as they discarded them. She had witnessed enough quiet devastations to know the pattern by heart. Still, as she accepted a glass of lemonade she did not drink, she became acutely aware of her own presence, of the line of her shoulders, of the thoughts she usually kept hidden. Across the room, the Duke spoke with an elderly countess, his expression grave, his laughter absent. He did not look toward Arabella again. The omission spoke louder than attention. A matron brushed past Eleanor, her tone sharp with speculation. "Extraordinary behavior," she whispered to her companion. "One wonders what possesses him." Eleanor wondered too, though she suspected the answer would never include her name. She thought of returning home early, of escaping before rumor could find her proximity suspicious. Respectability was fragile. She guarded hers fiercely. Yet when the Duke finally turned, his gaze sought her once more, unerringly. This time, he did not look away. He inclined his head, a gesture so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Eleanor felt it strike her like a question spoken aloud. She did not know that this single acknowledgment would unsettle every certainty she possessed, nor that by the next dawn her quiet life would no longer belong solely to her. She only knew that something irrevocable had begun, and that the room, for all its splendor, suddenly felt far too small to contain what was about to unfold. The night watched in silence, as fate leaned closer, smiling, patient, and entirely unrepentant. The days following the ball unfolded with a peculiar restlessness, as though London itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Carriages rattled along wet streets, newspapers bloomed with speculation, and drawing-rooms vibrated with the thrill of unfinished scandal. Eleanor Whitcomb felt it everywhere, pressing against her composure like an unseen tide. She had done nothing, said nothing, yet her name hovered at the edge of conversation, tethered to the Duke of Ravensmere by nothing more than a look and its consequences. She told herself the attention would fade. Society, voracious as it was, devoured novelties quickly. Still, when a small parcel arrived at her aunt's townhouse 3 mornings later, sealed with dark green wax, Eleanor's fingers trembled before she broke it. Inside lay a slim volume of poetry, its leather binding worn soft by use. No card accompanied it, only a single pressed sprig of winter jasmine tucked between the pages. Eleanor closed the parcel at once, her heart pounding with unreasonable force. Gifts carried meaning. Unsolicited ones carried danger. She examined the wax seal again, recognizing the ducal crest she had seen embossed on invitations. The room seemed to tilt. He could not possibly mean this for her. A mistake, surely. Or worse, a test. She hid the book in her escritoire, as though concealment might quiet the thoughts racing through her mind. Yet the words of the poets called to her memory, lines about endurance and unseen strength, about souls misjudged by the careless eye. She had not yet opened the volume, but already it felt intimate, chosen. At luncheon that day, Arabella's voice rang with brittle laughter. "Have you heard," she said, slicing into her pheasant with unnecessary vigor, "that the Duke has taken an interest in literature? How earnest of him!" Her gaze flicked toward Eleanor, sharp as a pin. Eleanor kept her eyes lowered, her appetite gone. She wondered whether Arabella sensed the truth or merely hunted for it. By week's end, the whispers grew less discreet. At a musicale, Eleanor felt eyes following her, assessing her figure as though it had changed overnight. Invitations arrived that had never before been extended. Politeness acquired an edge. She became, unwillingly, a question posed aloud. The Duke himself did not appear until the following Sunday, at St. Margaret's, where propriety dictated restraint. Eleanor sat 3 pews behind him, her attention fixed on the stained glass saints, though she could feel his presence like heat through stone. When the service ended, the congregation spilled into the churchyard, exchanging greetings dampened by mist. Eleanor lingered, hoping to escape unnoticed. "Miss Whitcomb." His voice was low, precise, impossible to ignore. She turned, her pulse betraying her calm. Up close, the Duke's reserve seemed less aloof than guarded, his dark eyes thoughtful rather than cold. "My lord," she replied, executing a perfect curtsy. "I trust you are well," he said, as though they were old acquaintances. "I wish to apologize if my actions at Ashcombe caused you discomfort." The words startled her. No one apologized to her for anything. "I was not the injured party," she said carefully. "No," he agreed, a flicker of something like regret crossing his features. "Yet you were present. That matters." Before she could answer, he placed the smallest of objects into her gloved hand, a cameo brooch, simple, antique, its carving softened by age. "I thought," he said, "that you might appreciate its history." Her breath caught. "My lord, this is improper." "Only if misunderstood," he replied. "I would not insult you with frivolity." They stood exposed, the space between them electric. A passing couple slowed, curiosity alight. Eleanor felt the weight of every watching eye. "I cannot accept," she said, though her fingers curled around the gift. "Then consider it a loan," he murmured. "Returned when you wish." He bowed and departed, leaving her standing amidst the gravestones, the cameo warm against her palm. The scandal ignited fully by evening. By Monday, it was no longer whispered that the Duke admired her. It was declared. Eleanor's family reacted with alarm thinly veiled as concern. Her aunt cautioned restraint. Arabella withdrew into icy silence. Letters arrived from distant relations offering advice she had not sought. Eleanor felt herself recast in a role she had never auditioned for, her every movement scrutinized for confirmation or denial. Alone at night, she opened the book at last. On the inside cover, in a hand both elegant and restrained, were the words, "To be seen is a risk worth taking." She closed it gently, her chest aching with fear and something perilously close to hope. She did not know what the Duke intended, nor whether she possessed the courage such intention demanded. She knew only that society had already decided there was a story unfolding, and she stood at its center, unprepared, unwilling, yet unable to step aside. In the days that followed the churchyard encounter, Eleanor attempted to resume her former habits, yet even solitude had acquired an audience. She walked in the park beneath bare-limbed trees, conscious of how greetings lingered longer than before. Shopkeepers smiled with curiosity. A bookseller asked her opinion where once he had ignored her entirely. Each courtesy felt provisional, extended not to her but to the rumor she carried. She questioned her own reflection, searching for the woman society now claimed to see, and found only the same thoughtful face, altered by awareness. At night, the city's distant clatter seemed to echo her uncertainty, every hoofbeat a reminder that attention, once summoned, rarely retreated without exacting a price. The following afternoon, as rain darkened the windows and London held its breath, a footman announced an unexpected caller. Eleanor rose, her heart hammering, aware that whatever came next would no longer be quiet, nor easily undone. Fate, she sensed, had shifted its posture, and patience alone would no longer shield her. The silence before the door opened felt heavier than any whisper she had endured. It promised consequence, choice, and irrevocable change. The Duke received Eleanor at Ravensmere House on an afternoon bruised purple by rain. The library smelled of leather and extinguished fire, its tall windows streaked with water that blurred the city beyond into abstraction. She stood just inside the threshold, gloved hands clasped, aware of how profoundly out of place she appeared among shelves that had known generations of men born certain of their worth. The Duke closed the door himself, an action too intimate to ignore, then gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. "You have placed me in an impossible position," Eleanor said at once, her voice steady despite the tension tightening her chest. "Whatever your intentions, the world has already decided them on my behalf." He inclined his head, accepting the rebuke without defense. "I feared as much," he replied. "Yet I could not allow misunderstanding to harden into silence." She removed her gloves slowly, deliberately, as though each movement restored her control. "You have given me tokens," she continued. "You have spoken to me where others might see. That is not silence, my lord. It is declaration." The word lingered between them, dangerous and undeniable. He studied her face, not with admiration, but with an attentiveness that unsettled her more deeply. "I did not mean to frighten you." "Then you do not know what it is to be made visible against one's will," she said quietly. "I have survived by being overlooked." He took a step closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "And I have been suffocated by what I am expected to see," he answered. "Beauty, advantage, obedience. I dismissed what was presented to me because it was hollow. In you, I perceived substance." Her breath caught, anger flaring to mask the ache his words stirred. "You perceived a curiosity," she said. "A novelty. I will not be paraded as evidence of your discernment." "I would never," he said sharply now. "You mistake me." "Do I?" She met his gaze fully for the first time, refusing retreat. "You are a duke. You are accustomed to choosing. I have spent my life being endured." The rain intensified, drumming against the glass. The Duke exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of restraint. "Then allow me to speak plainly," he said. "I have watched women praised for symmetry and silence, rewarded for pleasing the eye and troubling nothing else. You trouble everything. You listen. You observe. You endure. That commands my respect." Respect. The word struck deeper than admiration might have. Eleanor's composure wavered, emotion threatening the careful structure she maintained. "Respect is not affection," she said. "And affection is a luxury I cannot afford." "Nor can I," he said. "Yet it has found me regardless." Silence enveloped them, charged and fragile. Eleanor crossed the room to the window, her reflection ghosted in the glass beside his. "You ask me to risk ridicule, suspicion, and the ruin of my family's peace," she said. "For what?" "For truth," he replied. "For the possibility that you are not as alone as you believe." She turned, incredulous. "You offer possibility where others offer certainty. That is crueler." He did not deny it. "I offer choice," he said instead. "I will withdraw if you wish. I will accept your refusal and bear the consequences alone." The sincerity in his voice undid her more than insistence ever could. She had prepared herself for persuasion, not restraint. "You see," she said, her voice trembling now despite her effort, "I do not know how to be chosen. I know only how to remain." He stepped forward, careful, deliberate. "Then allow me to remain with you," he said. "Without promise. Without claim. Only honesty." The fire crackled faintly, casting light across his face, revealing the vulnerability beneath his authority. Eleanor felt the room shift, as though the world beyond the windows had receded. "If I consent to this," she said, "it must be without illusion. I will not be your experiment in defiance." "You will be my equal in risk," he said. Her laughter escaped her then, soft and incredulous. "Equality is a dangerous notion." "So is love," he replied, not looking away. The word hovered, unclaimed yet unmistakable. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, summoning the strength she had cultivated through years of dismissal. When she opened them, resolve tempered her fear. "Very well," she said. "But understand this, my lord. If you falter, if you retreat when the weight grows heavy, I will not forgive it." He bowed, a gesture stripped of ceremony. "Nor would I expect you to." A knock sounded at the door, abrupt and unwelcome. The Duke's expression hardened as reality intruded. Eleanor retrieved her gloves, the moment already slipping into memory. Yet as she reached the threshold, he spoke again, his voice low with urgency. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "what has begun here will not remain private for long." She paused, her hand on the latch. "Then let us hope," she answered softly, "that truth proves more durable than rumor." She stepped into the corridor, leaving him alone with the fire and the knowledge that neither of them could now retreat unmarked. Outside, the rain eased, but the storm she carried within had only just begun, and the world, alert and merciless, waited eagerly for her next misstep. The night of the Harrington Opera glittered with expectation sharpened to a blade. Crystal lamps cast trembling light across velvet draperies and gilded balconies, illuminating a gathering drawn less by music than by the promise of spectacle. Eleanor Whitcomb arrived quietly, her presence unannounced yet keenly observed. She wore ivory satin unadorned by jewels, her hair coiled with restraint rather than flourish. The simplicity was deliberate, armor against the scrutiny she had come to expect. Every step toward her seat felt measured against the collective breath of the room. Across the hall, the Duke of Ravensmere stood among dignitaries, his posture formal, his expression unreadable. He had been urged, cajoled, nearly commanded to attend. This night, society believed, would correct his earlier aberration. Whispers swelled, confident and anticipatory. Arabella Whitcomb appeared moments later in a gown of scarlet silk, her beauty sharpened by resolve. She smiled with practiced grace, accepting condolences disguised as compliments. Tonight, many believed, order would be restored. The orchestra began, yet few listened. Eyes flickered instead between Duke and cousins, tracing the invisible lines of expectation. Eleanor sat still, hands folded, her attention fixed upon the stage though her senses strained outward. She told herself she was prepared for disappointment, that the private honesty shared at Ravensmere House could not survive this public trial. She reminded herself that dignity lay in endurance, not triumph. During the interval, the Duke moved. Not toward Arabella, as anticipated, but across the crowded aisle toward Eleanor's row. Conversation fractured in his wake. He stopped before her, offering his arm with quiet certainty. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, his voice steady enough to command silence. "May I have the honor of your company?" The question reverberated louder than any declaration. Eleanor rose slowly, her pulse thunderous yet controlled. She placed her hand upon his sleeve, acutely aware of the eyes upon them, the sharp intake of breath, the instant recalibration of rumor. Together they crossed into the adjoining salon, the doors closing behind them with a finality that bordered on mercy. "I did not ask your permission," she said softly once they stood alone. "You have made my answer public." "I have," he replied, "because some truths wither when hidden." She searched his face for doubt and found none. "You understand what this costs," she said. "I do," he answered, "and I accept it." The doors reopened sooner than expected. The host, pale with curiosity, announced refreshments. The crowd poured in, eager, electric. The Duke did not release her arm. Instead, he turned, guiding her forward into the light, his voice rising above the murmur. "I have been indulged long enough," he said. "Tonight, I would speak plainly." Silence fell, absolute and charged. Eleanor felt the room tilt, the moment stretching thin as glass. "I was urged to admire what is easy," he continued, his gaze sweeping past Arabella without cruelty. "I was encouraged to choose what would please, what would reassure. I decline." A ripple of shock followed. Arabella stiffened, color draining from her face. Eleanor's breath caught, her instincts screaming retreat. Yet the Duke's grip remained steady. "I choose Miss Eleanor Whitcomb," he said. "Not in defiance, but in truth. I choose her intellect, her constancy, her courage. I choose the woman who stands when others decorate." The words struck like a bell, reverberating through the stunned assembly. Eleanor felt tears threaten, not of triumph, but of release. He turned to her then, lowering his voice. "Will you stand with me?" he asked, "knowing what follows?" She saw her past in the faces before her, the years of dismissal and quiet endurance. She saw, too, the risk of stepping forward, of being known. Her voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. "I will," she said, "provided I am never asked to disappear again." "Never," he promised. The evening concluded in fractured courtesies and brittle smiles. Some offered congratulations thick with disbelief, others withdrew entirely. Eleanor moved through it all as though changed in gravity, anchored by choice rather than accident. When the carriage finally bore her home, the city lights blurred past, unfamiliar and luminous. Alone at her window later, Eleanor removed the cameo from her gown and set it beside the book of poems. The world beyond stirred with reaction, with judgment yet to come. She knew acceptance would not be universal, nor kindness guaranteed. Still, as she recalled the Duke's unwavering voice and the moment he had spoken her name without apology, She felt something steady take root. Tomorrow, society would respond. Tonight, she allowed herself the smallest breath of certainty. She had been seen, chosen, and named aloud. Whatever followed would demand resilience greater than she had ever known, and the cost would not be gentle. Yet as the city settled into uneasy sleep, Eleanor understood that the true trial was only beginning, and that love, once declared, would soon demand its final proof. The weeks that followed unfolded not with spectacle but with pressure, slow and relentless, as society tested the strength of what had been declared. Doors once open closed politely. Invitations thinned. Praise arrived cautiously, wrapped in surprise. Eleanor Whitcomb felt the scrutiny sharpen, no longer curious but evaluative, as though the world waited to see whether she would falter beneath the weight of the title now poised above her. She did not retreat. She learned instead how to stand where she had once been asked to soften herself into absence. The Duke of Ravensmere did not shield her from consequence. He walked beside her through it. At dinners where silence thickened, he addressed her directly. At gatherings where glances lingered, he offered his arm without hesitation. The gesture was not protection but partnership, unmistakable in its intent. Eleanor discovered that courage, shared, did not diminish. It multiplied. Yet she also learned that love, once chosen, demanded constancy beyond proclamation. The formal betrothal was announced beneath gray winter skies. Bells rang without joy, merely duty, yet Eleanor heard in them a quiet affirmation. Letters arrived from distant estates, some congratulatory, others edged with caution. Arabella departed for the countryside, her beauty undimmed yet curiously irrelevant now. Eleanor felt no triumph in this, only a sober awareness that value, once assigned, could be reassigned again. She resolved that hers would never rest upon comparison. At Ravensmere House, Eleanor's presence altered the rhythms of power. Servants watched her carefully, then relaxed. Estate managers sought her opinion and found it measured, thoughtful. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, her words carried weight earned through attention. The Duke observed this transformation without interference, pride tempered by respect. He had chosen a woman, not a symbol, and the distinction mattered. On the eve of their marriage, Eleanor stood alone in the library where truth had first been spoken. The fire burned low, shadows stretching along the shelves. She touched the spines of books she had not yet read, futures not yet claimed. Doubt visited her then, not sharp but insistent. Could love endure when novelty faded? Could society ever fully release its grip? The Duke found her there, as though summoned by the question itself. "You are quiet," he said. "I am listening," she replied, "to the life I am leaving, and the one awaiting me." He took her hands, unloved, grounding her. "If you wish to stop," he said, "say so now. I will honor it." She studied his face, this man who had risked certainty for truth. "I do not wish to stop," she said. "I wish to continue with eyes open." They were married without extravagance, witnessed by those who mattered rather than those who approved. Eleanor wore pearl-gray silk, neither dazzling nor demure. When vows were exchanged, her voice did not waver. The Duke's did, just once, and she treasured that fracture as proof of sincerity. The transformation was not immediate. Becoming Duchess of Ravensmere required learning the architecture of influence, the careful balance of mercy and command. Eleanor made mistakes. She corrected them. She discovered that kindness, when paired with firmness, inspired loyalty deeper than fear. Slowly, the estate reflected her presence, not altered in grandeur but in tone. People listened. Lives eased. Years passed. The scandal faded into anecdote, then into legend reshaped by outcome. Society adjusted, as it always did, bowing eventually to what endured. Eleanor was no longer discussed as the unexpected choice but as the inevitable one. She carried herself with a grace unborrowed, her authority rooted in attentiveness rather than display. The Duke, watching her navigate rooms once hostile, felt his admiration deepen into reverence. On a spring evening much like the one that had begun it all, Eleanor stood at the window of Ravensmere House, firelight warm behind her, rain soft upon the glass. The Duke joined her, their hands finding one another without thought. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. She considered the question, the years of struggle, the cost of being seen. "No," she said. "I regret only the time spent believing I was small." He kissed her then, not as a duke claiming his duchess, but as a man honoring the woman who had transformed his understanding of worth. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the world washed and waiting. Eleanor looked outward, steady and unafraid, knowing that legacy was not bestowed by title but forged through courage, and that her story, once whispered, now stood complete, unhidden, and entirely her own.